Welcome along to this higher PE presentation. This presentation is on the self-reflection sheet, which is a method of data collection. Throughout the presentation, we'll have a look at how to describe it, we'll have a look at the positives of it, as well as the negatives. Let's consider the purpose of a self-reflection sheet. Well, essentially, it is a method of data collection. It allows you to gather data on a certain factor. We've got individual self-reflection sheets for each factor. So we have one for the mental factor, one for the social factor, and one for the emotional factor. After completing a self-reflection sheet, you get to find out what is your best factor and what is your worst sub-factor. Now, that is very useful when planning a PDP. On this slide here, you can see what our self-reflection sheet looks like here at our school. You can see over on the right hand side is the boxes to fill in. On the left hand side, you can see there's an instruction manual on how to complete it. On the right hand side, we've got a space for the performance you're undertaking and the date. That's really important to help with monitoring. On the mental toughness, we've got a scale between 1 and 10. Now you've got to think about your mental toughness in your past performance. You then need to grade yourself on how well you then dealt with pressure situations and how good your mental toughness was when dealing with that pressure situation. So you give yourself a score between 1, not very good, and 10 if it was great. You then have to give a comment about why you felt this. This is where it differs from the questionnaire. We're now picking up quantitative data as well as qualitative data. You can see there's also a box for concentration, grading a number and also giving a comment, and the same again for decision making. Give your number and then a comment. So, in the higher PE exam, there's a number of command words that will ask you to answer certain questions. One of these words is a describe question. So a describe question is essentially giving an instruction manual on how you would complete it. Always think if somebody new came into the class and they hadn't filled out a self-reflection sheet before, it'd be a series of instructions to help them complete it. So the first thing I would think about is to tell them how many sections are in the self-reflection sheet. Well, there's 3, one for each sub-factor. The next question is, where did you carry it? Where and when did you carry it out? Well, it was carried out straight after a performance, and in an ideal scenario, you would fill it out alone in a quiet area with no distractions. Which factors does it cover? Well, that's important for essentially which question you're asking. If it was a mental factors question, you would complete the mental self-reflection sheet, which would then focus on mental toughness, decision making and concentration. And it would be the same for the emotional factor, where you'd look at anger, fear and confidence. The social factor would look at cooperation, communication and relationships. So these are the factors that are covered. It really relates to which question you're being asked. The final one I would consider here is about protocol. Protocol basically means how do you do it. If you go back to the previous slide, you'll hear me describing it again whilst we had it up on the screen. Essentially, you grade yourself between 1 and 10 and how you felt that factor was in your last performance. You then have to qualify it by giving a written comment about why you gave that number. In the higher PE exam, you may be asked to analyse or evaluate in certain questions. In order to do this, you'll require the positives of a self-reflection sheet. So let's think about them just now. So the good news about the self-reflection sheet is you're given both quantitative and qualitative data. It's not just circling a number. You also then get a qualitative bit of data, which is your thoughts, written out on what exactly you felt about that factor. So you get much more detail than just actually getting a number by itself. Another positive is that the athlete's own thoughts is not somebody who is maybe watching your performance and giving you feedback like a coach. It all comes from how you feel inside you. You're the person that knows your thoughts best. Next one is it gathers data on all sub-factors. We don't just gather data on the mental toughness element or sub-factor of the mental factor. We actually consider all 3 mental factors. We consider mental toughness, concentration and decision making. This is really handy when trying to see our strengths and our weaknesses. The next one is it's simple and it's easy to do. Now the form itself is quite simple. You essentially circle a number and then say why you circled that number. I think our first year pupils here at the school could carry it out. I don't think it's a tricky task, and that's a positive self-reflection sheet. The task isn't too complex to do to actually gather that data. The next positive is it's a permanent record. It doesn't go anywhere, we don't destroy it, it's a bit of paper which we look after and we keep. It's not like a computer file that may get lost, or it may actually just the technology doesn't let you access the file. It's a piece of it's a piece of paper, and it doesn't go anywhere. That's vitally important for you to make comparisons, which again helps you with the monitoring process. The next one is it's played against an opponent of a similar ability. That's very important because when you're filling out a self-reflection sheet, you're not playing against maybe the very best team in the area. You're also not playing against the very worst team in the area or at your school. You're playing against an opponent of a similar ability. This is key because it lets you actually gather real data that shows you what your strengths and weaknesses is. If we're putting against someone that's too good, you're really maybe all your factors might look particularly poor, or again, if it's too easy, again, you're not getting a fair representation of how you actually are in relation to the mental factor. As with all methods of data collection, as well as approaches, there's actually positives and unfortunately some negatives. So let's have a think about some of the negatives of the self-reflection sheet. The first one is the performer may actually have a clouded view of themselves. They might actually think they're great in all factors or one in particular, and they might think, or on the other hand, they may think they're absolutely dreadful at them all. So actually, it's very difficult for a performer to have a very clear view of themselves sometimes, and they can either rate themselves excellent or actually very harshly. Another negative is they might be influenced by the outcome of the game. So, if we're looking at a performance shortly after a game of badminton, where you maybe lost quite heavily, you might be very harsh on yourself, and the data you collect on the self reflection sheet might not be actually representative of a more fair or even game, or a game where you actually performed a lot better. So, the influence or the outcome of the game might actually influence the way you answer some of these questions. Another negative is you might not be able to get that quiet space in a classroom straight after the performance, so you might have to wait a couple of days. This can actually influence the data you collect and make it slightly more invalid or slightly more unreliable. This is because you have to think back to performance and you may miss aspects of the game. Now, another negative is the layout of the self-reflection sheet is actually quite simplistic. And if you were to hand that to a performer, and if you think of a sports team, if I went into the Kilmarnock changing room and I said to them, listen guys, could you fill out this self-reflection sheet? They might look at it and think that is far too simple, very simplistic. And then how seriously are they going to take it when they answer? Well, the answer is they might not take it that serious because it looks too simplistic. Therefore, they might rush through it or maybe not give it some serious thought. Therefore, the data they collect, again, is going to be invalid and unreliable. Next, the performer may not understand the factor, so they're being asked questions about their mental toughness. Mental toughness might not be a phrase or a factor that everyone's totally comfortable with or have a good understanding of. So if you don't know what to do, well, guess what? People are going to guess in that instance. So when they guess, again, they might be putting it really harsh and they might be being very favourable to themselves without actually understanding what the factor means. Therefore, the data they've gathered might be invalid or unreliable. The last one is the performer might not want to admit weakness. You can imagine that if you're sitting in a classroom next to a friend and it asks you how mentally strong are you or your mental toughness, how good is it? Well, actually, you might want to just go by quite a safe, maybe a positive number on yourself. You might circle 9, where in reality, when the pressure's on, you might be down at a 2 or a 3. But because you're under that pressure of sitting next to somebody, or you might not want to admit it to yourself, you might just get invalid data or unreliable data because you've scored yourself far too highly. If you've enjoyed this video, it would be great if you could like and subscribe to all of our other videos. Also, if you want some more information, you can visit the Higher PE Glow page where we've got all the information you require for the Higher PE course.